Hey guys, how are you doing? This is Zed from Zed Outdoors and I hope you're having an awesome day. So today I've come down to see a good friend of mine, Dan Lawrence. Dan, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Pleasure to have you here, Zed.
Thank you for having me. So if you're not familiar with Dan, Dan is a very talented full-time professional craftsman. I've known Dan for a few years now. We've hung out, been fortunate to hang out at a few of the UK green woodworking and spoon carving events. Now, Dan, like I said, is full-time in various disciplines of crafts. He's based part-time in Edale in the Peak District in the county of Derbyshire, which is actually where we're filming today, but he's also based part-time in London. Now, as I mentioned, one of Dan's specialities within the many disciplines that he covers is spoon carving. And Dan is truly one of the most talented spoon carvers I know. He's got a very creative style about him, very expressive in the way he carves and what it is that he carves. And so what we're actually doing on this occasion in my visit down to see Dan is we're recording a series of videos. Now, in this first video that you're watching, we are going to be looking at Dan Lawrence's process on how he carves an eating spoon. Now, a few things to kind of bear in mind. Number one, we've broken this video down into sections. So if you look at the timeline on the bottom of this video, you will see various sections marked out. Those are timestamps, so you can jump to any particular section, or you can see just by moving your cursor over there what part of the video, what it is that we're covering. Those timestamps are also in the description just below this video. YouTube has a very cool feature. If you click on the time part on the left hand side, that will take you straight to that particular part of the video. Because what this video is designed to do is Dan's going to be going through the entire process in the hope that it provides some kind of teaching stroke informative guide for you to follow yourself, be you a beginner, intermediate or advanced. So like I said, timestamps for everything down below. Also, I will be putting a link below to Dan's social media, mainly Instagram, and also his website. Highly recommend you go check him out. You can see the myriad of work that he gets up to, as well as the work that he's gotten up to previously. So it gives you a really good insight on what he gets up to. Because not only is he a prolific maker, but he is also a teacher as well, teaching one-on-one groups and at various events here in the UK and abroad. The final thing to kind of bear in mind before we get started with this video is that, like I said, this is part one of a series of videos that I'm filming with Dan. To check those other videos out, which I highly recommend you do, once again, links below will be in the description. So what we're going to do now, we're going to get started with this tutorial. As you can see, it's quite a lengthy video. That's because there's going to be a lot to cover. So the way we're going to start this video off now, in the next section, we're actually going to be having a detailed look at a collection of Dan's carved spoons in order to give you kind of an insight, if you're not familiar with his work, you know, what it is he carves, the styles that he does, and kind of a lot of the thought process that goes into it. And thereafter, we'll get straight into the actual making of the spoon. So Dan, with your kind permission, shall we begin?
Let's go.
Right, let's do this. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the rest of this video where Dan Lawrence is going to be teaching you how to carve a spoon. So Dan, before we get into the actual detailed discussion of your carved spoons, I'm curious, and the viewers may be curious, how you yourself got into spoon carving.
Well, it's a very common question, isn't it? And I think a really good question because it is interesting at the beginning of the journey. So this book is what got me into carving. I guess I had the intention already, but I think, see if I can quickly flick to it. So I'd been playing around, you know, so the longest story is that I used to climb almost full-time, 5 days a week, and I injured my finger, and in the winter I was slacklining a lot, and then in the summer I thought, oh, I really just want to sit against a tree, in the woods, relaxed, but making something small from wood, you know, just with simple tools. And obviously I'm from a generation of watching Ray Mears, and that was always in the back of there, kind of sitting around. And then one day out with a friend, we were at a bookshop, and I said, you know what I need? I need just a little book about whittling or something just to help me. And then this was on the shelf. So yeah, I started off with the things like butter spreaders and didn't really know, I just had a multi-tool. And then I got onto the spoon, and I think there was something about the ergonomics, there was something about that it was useful, something about that it was a recognizable form, and I just loved it. And then I think from then on I was still carving other things, but I just tried to get everything I could online about how to carve a spoon a bit better than that and get better knife skills. And then it was about 6 months after I began that the first ever Spoon Fest happened. And I lived in Leeds at the time, and it's obviously in Edale, so it was really easy for me to get there, and that then blew my mind. That when it was looking at the axes, the tools and everything, because I didn't have an axe at that point. So that really kind of, I think, was just the timing was just right. And then I think maybe after that, I think around that time I had quit my job. I'd gotten kind of fed up, but I'd saved enough money to live for 3 months without having to worry about money. And I just was in my basement carving spoons all day, every day. And it would take me an entire day, you know, from about 10 till probably 6 o'clock in the evening to make one spoon. You know, all the kind of axing and everything. It took me a long, long time. Probably because I had very blunt tools as well. That probably didn't help matters. So yeah, that's kind of the short of it.
And where do you draw your inspiration from with your spoon carving and your crafts in general?
So I come from a fine art background and a graphic design background, so that's where I would draw inspiration in terms of looking at art, sculpture, but then more so recently, I guess, but always is just nature, what's around you. And that doesn't necessarily mean green nature and trees and whatever and things like that. It can be more banal things. It can just be shapes that you find. At one point it was the shape of a toilet bowl or something like that, and just looking at different textures and how they interact. So really anything that's around me, I think if it's relevant and it's around me and I find it kind of interesting, and particularly now to present day, something that's really present in my mind that's an inspiration is colour and pattern, and in particular the colour of the flowers or the nature that's popping up. So at the moment it's lilacs, and that's why you can see that I've painted most of these new bowls lilac, because particularly in London, all the lilacs are out. You walk down any street and there's 5 or 6 lilac trees. You can smell them, and so to then translate that into what I make feels really good.
So starting off at the very end there, in no particular order, would you like to talk us through what we're looking at in terms of your spoons?
Yeah, so I picked this one out because it's actually a pretty old one. But what it does show is that for a long time I was really, really interested in natural dyes. And so I spent probably 2 or 3 years really looking deep into natural dyes. And this one is an iron oxide mix with a touch of oak gall ink, and it stayed really, really well, but particularly on the sycamore it seems to work really, really well. And all that I did, as you can see here, what I kind of refer to as a tide line, is I just dunked it in, but you can just see that golden colour. And actually if you get into iron oxide, one tip I recently gave someone else is, so I think a lot of people now might know about the iron oxide and ebonizing things, but something that I found is that when you put some high carbon steel or anything that's going to rust nice and quickly, is to have some iron poking out into the air. So I had a jar, and then there was kind of that much of the jar that there wasn't anything, but things were poking out, and there was this kind of environment happening, and you would get this orange foam appear really, really quickly. And that is what creates that lovely golden orange. Instead of the really dark colour there, you would get that kind of orange colour. So that there is something that you can kind of play around with, is actually creating this kind of oxidized foam. Yeah, and then I guess, like we said, no particular order. So that's quite an old one, and then these ones that I really enjoy playing around with, and it's having the paint as a wash effect is something that I started doing some years ago, and then recently really kind of got the hang of. And I think actually, to tell you the truth, it came out because I painted something and I didn't like it, so I immediately ran to the sink and tried to wash it off, and then it had stained it, and I thought, oh, that's really nice. Okay, we're going to do that again and again and again. So yeah, you can see the grain coming through, and little details around the rim. I really like doing. It's in no particular inspiration there, other than trying to accentuate that around there. And then this one, trying to just do some simple decorations, but trying to do something like Jane Mickleburgh's, the wax inlay that she does. But something I like about these is that actually it was a design that I really liked some years ago, and I think I made one like it. And to be honest, I didn't think that people would buy it, because we were so deep in the Swedish style of carving, and I made a few of them, and I thought I really liked just this basic kind of stick shape, and then I thought, oh, I've got to put a neck in, and that was my mindset back then, that I had to do it in a way that everyone had done it. And then I think as you start to build your confidence, build your skills, you can start going, actually I want to do like this. And then you've got people like Woodman's Finest, who does really kind of super slick kind of versions of these, which he calls kayaks spoons, I think. And then other little features, I guess, I like this little bow or butterfly, or things that I guess are a bit more up for interpretation, you know. I kind of, and I think sometimes this is a bit more proud, and sometimes it'll be a different colour, but kind of adding things like that is a fun little thing. And once again, we've got another one of those kind of spoons, and just trying to do, so because I use a scalpel blade to do a lot of these decorations, you can do really, really tiny chip carving. And what I quite like about some of this one maybe hasn't worked as well as some of the others, but I like how sometimes it disappears and reappears. That's something that has always kind of fascinated me. And then we move on to, this is the most recent one that just sold. This is actually from a bent branch, which is one of the reasons I really liked keeping a kind of longer bowl. But this has got a kind of that colour fade that I think people have started to know that I've been doing for a little while. And that is another one that kind of was accident and intention kind of mixed. And it was putting lots of different colour on, and then going, I don't like that colour, and then overlaying lots of colour, and then going, oh, it's all horrible, wash it off. And then actually the way the grain picks it up is really, really special.
And also, this is where we start to see the appearance of your bird finial.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know how long. I think maybe 6 years I've been doing these birds. And actually the bird finial came from, like a lot of good things. I think this is why I like people to just have a go at things and not be so afraid of mistakes. It came from a mistake, which I was trying to carve the bull finial, and I made a really bad cut, and it made a kind of weird cut. And then because I was sat surrounded by birds, I thought, oh, it kind of looks a bit like a bird, you know, and then kind of fiddled around with it and tried to make it look like a bird. And then I think the first few that I actually got to look like a bird, fumbled my way around trying to figure out the three-dimensional form. Yeah, I really liked what was happening, and so did lots of other people. And then I think, you know, you just run with something. And I think I really enjoyed looking at a three-dimensional form. I would really look at the birds. How does that transition to that? How can I do that? And I would imagine carving it. So that's, I think, where my sculpture and fine art background really kind of aided me. I did a lot of sketching and stuff first.
And if we get the opportunity, I think, on this visit, or sometime in the very near future, we should be filming a video. Is that correct?
Yeah, hopefully. That'd be great, yeah.
Yeah. So, moving on to the next spoon.
So this is actually probably very similar to what we will carve as a standing, but this is obviously more designed for a left-hander because of that long kind of what I would call a cutting edge. So if you're eating or something, you can cut with it, but then also when you're scooping around the bowl, you know, that line is going to be able to scoop a lot going on there. And I guess also you're seeing more this asymmetrical kind of off-center, perhaps a bit wonky thing going on. And then actually leading onto this one, this is a good, like, I can do symmetrical. And once, I think what these we're trying to see, I'm trying to share with these is that actually that how inspirations from just the natural world that I see come in, and this just happened to be a really cloudy day. And I'd painted it blue and I didn't like the blue. And then I thought, you know, you're looking at the clouds, these big fluffy clouds. And then I thought, oh, maybe somehow I can make something kind of cloud form. And then another, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same, you know, variation on a theme really. And I guess one thing that I got pretty well known for is doing asymmetrical facets that swoop and run down the handle to get different shapes. Because I know that Barn, that's the first time I saw it, Barn doing a central one on an elm teaspoon, and he called it the feather spoon. So I think all that did is inspire me to play around with that facet and how you can make those grains kind of go around. And then playing around with the cowl spoon, the Welsh kind of cowl spoon. Nothing much to say about that other than I really like those kind of bowl shapes playing around, and that actually very much relates to the shell and how that kind of works. And then this one maybe is a good little demo of playing around. I really like playing around with the neck. I think that's probably my favourite area to try and play around and experiment, and doesn't always work. Like this one has this big knot there which I thought was really ugly, that's why I painted it. And yeah, just trying to do kind of, I think you can see it there as well, the way the kind of top of the handle actually flows over the bowl. And then things like the bowl kind of goes around it, trying to do things like that. And then the decoration with the grass as well, that's something that actually just the walk that we did the other day, that's where seeing the grass silhouetted by the sunset was really magical, and I wanted to somehow translate that onto the spoons. So just doing some kind of very simple chip carving. And then this one again, I think painting it gold was definitely inspired by Oren and his gold. I was thinking, okay, I've got to have a gold bird, come on. So yeah, so but I'm still not sure what I think about the gold bird. I think his gold snails work better than my gold birds. And this is kind of another standard style of bird spoon. So I guess these two are the two that I play. I'll either make this one or this one, because I quite like doing something a bit symmetrical sometimes, but for me, particularly on these ones, this kind of style came from this facet down here dropping to a point and then bouncing up, and this one not so much. Do I have another one that kind of does it a bit more? Maybe this one does. No, that one's a different style. But anyway, other things, I think that's what I'm enjoying talking about is my inspirations, is bouncing balls and the way you would bounce a ball and it would have this lovely arc. And so I was trying to recreate that with that shadow there. So that's kind of something I was playing around with. Yeah, a little scoop. Oh, this is the other like iron oxide, and this is double dipped. And then I guess actually what is good to know about this one is doing a bird silhouette and having more of a kind of, you know, it's not so obvious that it's a bird, but I think just having something, and also it really lent itself to something asymmetrical, you know, instead of having a flat top or symmetrical. So yeah, that's that. And then a little rowan crook. And this one is that kind of, I guess, evening colour. You know, you've got like the dark blue one of the other handles, that's kind of nighttime. And then this one maybe is a bit more of that kind of pale evening sunset light. And 3, because I like 3. Yeah, and then doing things like this is something I really like on long-handled ones. That's why these kind of style spoons really lend themselves to decoration. But this is a good demonstration of how I really like how things fade and kind of disappear, and how they kind of swoop and make these long lines. That's something I really, really enjoy doing. And then now we're getting on to some that are almost complete, you know, they're 99% finished. They just haven't had any oil. And it's where I start having things around for a while. Sometimes maybe months and months and months and I'll think, am I going to decorate it? Am I just going to paint it? And, you know, sometimes that inspiration comes and you end up decorating it, or you end up just oiling it. But yeah, and I think actually this one now is my recent favourite. And actually this really relates back to talking earlier about when you do something, you don't necessarily have the confidence to really go with it. And so actually there's a stage just before finishing where I think, oh, I really like it just like that. But it either seems too chunky, too big, too square, or too something. And this was a good example where I was thinking, oh, the neck is quite wide, maybe I should narrow the neck. You know, lots of people like thin necks. And just here, a bit more of a square. It was actually wider. I wish I would have kept it even wider. But yeah, and also this ash. So ash is normally synonymous with being quite a pale wood. Whereas I think what I've discovered a little bit is that if you rough out an ash blank in this grain orientation, which is, God, I always forget this. What is it? It's not tangential, radial. A radial split, and then leave it in some scummy water for at least a few weeks, and it mellows and it brings on this lovely warm kind of colour, which I really, really like. So I'm going to be experimenting with that a little bit more. But yeah, playing around with the neck again, these little pinched neck, and just doing nice things and trying to keep some kind of asymmetry. And the other thing that you will probably notice is that I like putting the bird asymmetrically and having that dip, because I think it just lifts the bird even more, kind of gives it that little bit of a rise. Whereas on this one I tried to follow the grain, so maybe it looked like it was sitting kind of in the hand a little bit more. Yeah, and then simple wiggly things, I think, yeah, anything that follows the grain. And then here's a little collection of kind of long handled jar spoons, even eating spoons, but I don't see that many people making things with this kind of purpose, and I really enjoy using these, like for yogurts or for jams or kind of anything really. And this one's a bit of a, you know, I think this is one probably no one's seen much, but trying to do lots of different things. And I don't know if you can see, there's actually this kind of geometrical kind of texture going on there, which I think I'd like to do again, maybe. And I think it's just because I had a chisel or something for the first time, and I was thinking, what can a square edge do? So yeah, just playing around, and also it's something kind of for your thumb to explore. And then I think, yeah, it's going to be something like this that we're going to do. And recently on my Instagram, I asked people what did they find the most difficult, the bowl, the neck, or the crank, and everyone said the neck they find really difficult. So I think we can definitely kind of look into the neck. And then this one, so leaving things in water to go really scummy, and then you suddenly find them and they stink and they're really slimy. This is an example of a beach blank that I left in some water for probably 3 months, just outside in a bucket with rainwater, so it's really kind of scummy. But it definitely changed the colour. And this one, I don't know if you can see there's axe marks, there's grain, and then this is where the bark has just peeled off. So anything where I can express the natural aspect of wood is what I really go for. You know, I really want to, and how the tool interacts with the wood, and leaving a kind of story marks in a way where you can see, oh, that's that tool mark. And I think, you know, when you're looking around on really old buildings, old stone buildings, and then you see those chisel marks and you think, wow, there was someone standing there and that was the last mark they said, yep, they're going to leave it. That's what I want people to see. And I really like that connection to that past, that action. You know, it really is a history of action. So yeah, and then should we keep going?
I think we can have a brief look at the rest of what you got on this table.
Yeah, I think so. So ladles, I really enjoy making ladles. And this one is a new one with a nice wonky, everything's a bit wonky with a bit of a hook on the back. Yeah, I think playing around, and this is something new, trying to get a woodpecker on this to appear as though it's landed on the side of the handle, and which is really fun to then texture the handle to maybe look a bit more like a tree. This one's a commission that I'm trying to finish for next week because, okay, the story, so I had this idea almost a year ago. I made one that if you go on my Instagram, you'll see the first one I ever made, and it was sat here on this table for months. And my friend Julia would come round and she'd give the veg box, whatever, and she would always pick it up going, oh, are you going to finish this one? I said, I don't know, I might chop it off, I don't know whether to paint it. And then Rob came round and he said, definitely paint it. Yeah, that's great, that's really good. And that kind of gave me the impetus to actually finish it. And I love that challenge of trying to make a three-dimensional form work, not making it look perhaps too perfect and lifelike, giving it some kind of character. Yeah, and then finally, I think I don't see that many people playing around with spatulas, and I think these ones are just from when you get a large log around a knot, and you get all these kind of, especially with if you're making bowls, you're slicing off really nice pieces of wood, and I think it's great to kind of try and use them. So different kinds of spatulas, and then this is inspired by Carve, Herkel, I think his name is, trying to create funny little scoops and things. So I think this is just kind of showing some experimentation. And then a couple of little spreaders, different. This is I was saying to you earlier, this is a design that I made probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been sat in my box, and I don't know whether I'm going to make any more or whether I should. But this is the kind of standard little spreader thing. And this one actually, I think, works the best. I've used a lot of different kind of wooden spreaders, and I think this little rounded with the sort of flat top works the best. You can really do it that way. Yeah, some other ones I've seen, they don't really work so well. Yeah.
So with the video then, you said we're going to carve something similar to one of these spoons?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because you can see you've got some asymmetry in there. There's that little kind of bird shape on there. And it's, it's fairly simple, but I think there's a lot of fun, and and not only that, we'll see what happens with the piece of wood. The wood definitely will have some input. I'm not going to be dictated by the wood, but there will be input.
So to begin the process, where are we going to begin?
Well, I guess we have to begin with some wood. So this is some beech just up the hill. On the recent storms, a branch had come down, so it's still pretty fresh. So I've got more of it, and there were some nice bends in it as well. And this one has a nice little bend in it. You can kind of see these little creases in there. So we're going to try and find a way just to utilize it. It's not really a crook, but there is a nice little bend which will help us give a little bit of added crank. And also, if we can line up the bowl with this, it should give us some nice little kind of effect or pattern that should shine through in the bowl as well. And when I've cut it a little bit longer for this reason. This is just where it's being cut maybe 3 days ago. But that's fine, because my measurement is always 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I'll probably end off sawing it off about there, because for some reason that end is fine. So yeah, and I guess when I'm looking for a log or something for an eating spoon, this is definitely ample size, like there's plenty there. But I always think, as long as I know I'm going to get about 3 fingers depth, okay, running through, as in width-wise, because a bowl of an eating spoon is almost never wider than your 3 fingers, in my experience. Like, not many people are going to be putting a bowl that size in their mouth, so just doing that kind of gives you some idea. So shall we get splitting?
Let's do this.
So, which end am I going to split from? So one kind of concern not concern, but I'm just very aware of is where the pith is. And the pith is quite high up, and it's quite high up there as well, so it means we won't get so much depth, but I think because it's a bit of a bent branch, I think that should be fine. So I'm going to go through that split already. And I'm just doing it slowly, just so I can kind of see where it's going and have as much control as possible. So what have we got? So we're going to chop it off about there anyway. So you can see it's moving slightly to one side. And this side actually I think I could use as well. Yeah, actually this side seems really nice. It's moving to the right, you know, it's in my right hand, it's moving into the bowl. The twist is also kind of moving in a nice way. So that's something I'm doing. I'm already imagining it as a spoon that I would eat with. And I'm already thinking, how's that feeling in my hand? Which way is it twisting? And I guess this is obviously going to give you a different grain pattern, isn't it? This is going to give you those kind of rings. I don't actually have any examples, but most people are going to be bark up, and we're going to be diving into there. And I think because I'm going to saw a bit of that end off. Yeah, this is probably where I do actually spend quite a bit of time just thinking. I'm wondering if I should use this one. No, let's try this one. I think it's how most people are going to go. And first of all, I'm just going to trim up.
So what axe are you using for those who may be curious?
So this is a die forge from Sweden. This is Julia Kalthoff. Axe, and it's from a recent trade, so this is still pretty new to me, this axe, but it is, yeah, going between Edale and London, I used to leave an axe in London and then leave an axe here, and I'd be happy with that. Now I take this one with me back and forth. I want this one with me all the time. It's just a really good weight, for me anyway. And it just cuts really, really well. It does what I want it to do. It's not too aggressive. So I'm just cleaning up the sides, because at this stage I'm still actually making a lot of decisions, and I'm going quite slowly. I'm not just kind of going, okay, this is a spoon I'm making, and ignoring what the wood is doing. So this is helping me kind of still make decisions. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So ideally I want to chop off there, but that's where that split is running. However, what I'm wondering, so there are a few more little splits there, is actually when I begin to carve, that could well just actually disappear anyway, and if it's in the handle, it's not too much of a big deal. So I think what I will do is let's saw off. And you can use any saw, I just happen to have this one to hand, and it's quite a nice fine saw. There you go. I think this is something that always surprised me. So that's what we just got off there. And you're thinking, oh, there's a split, and then there's more little checks running there, and it's probably running all the way down there. And then you open it up, and I can see just that it's still just about going in there. But I think where the handle's going to sit, it's not going to bother us too much. And then I think 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I'm going to get something. Oh, and recently I asked people on my Instagram, do you like a long handle, short handle, or medium-sized handle? And almost everyone said medium-sized handle. And I said, okay, what constitutes as medium-sized? And I measured all of mine, and they were all about 8 to 9 centimeters long, and that's what most people kind of suggested. So I'm still kind of, so luckily the twist kind of comes into what would effectively be the bowl. Oh, I'm a bit worn out from that sawing. I'm looking at things like this overall shape, because the tendency might be to whack it right in the middle, but actually maybe I'm going to put it more to this side, because that side fades away a bit, so I'm actually thinking of putting it more to one side. So what I'm going to do now is, I guess for me, I approach things quite slowly, because I don't draw anything anymore. So now I've sort of made the decision now, this is my handle. So I'm just trimming that down. And I have been asked quite a lot of, what's your process, what do you do first? And it's not always a hard and fast rule. I think I actually end up experimenting quite a bit with other methods of how to get to the place that I want to go to. But one thing I am always doing is just checking to see what's happening, which way the split goes. Yeah, and just keeping. So I suppose at this stage as well, even though it's going to be an asymmetrical spoon, actually, I'm not really introducing much asymmetry just yet. I'm actually just trying to get something that I can work with. And now this is the bowl. I'm just taking off 2 angles that will then, now you can see where the pith was. Just remove that. And I tend to work in 3s. 1, 2, 3. 1 central facet and 2 side facets. I'll just work that bowl. And I'm moving this piece of wood to guide around. And I think something that has come from a lot of experience, because I've carved a lot of spoons now, is having some idea of exactly what the finished spoon is going to look like and what kind of angles there are, so I can kind of guide myself. I guess what I'm doing is visualizing the end product. And I really like those, I heard it from Barn, that was his kind of, it's a bump cut, bumping those things together. Particularly here, because I've found even now, I'll think, well, I'm a professional, I can just kind of go up there and then boom, I'll hit into there, and I think, okay, now I've got to change everything a little bit. Just not such a big deal, but I think particularly if you want to be precise or you haven't carved that many spoons, instead of trying to be some maverick, you can just... Right, so now you can see I've got my crank in there, and these creases are about kind of, the bowl's going to be about there. I'm always measuring with my fingers. Okay. I'm trying to line up this bottom with that top surface, but it's still obviously really, really wide. So what am I going to do now? So I'm still just holding it in my hand, feeling where, yeah, I think that's kind of all right. Just blend that in. Because for me, doing the crank is actually perhaps one of the most important and fun things. So now, 3 fingers, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's thirds. I tend to always work in thirds. That comes from my graphics. And so now I know that somewhere around here, I'm just going to break up the fibers. And some of the techniques you might see me use might seem really wild, like this. So I wouldn't recommend that kind of thing for a beginner. And maybe I wouldn't even recommend it. It's just when you've been carving a long time, you pick up your own little ways of doing things that you feel comfortable with. Because I have gone into my doing a slightly different one, but I have gone into my hand before, so I feel quite. But what I'm actually doing here, there is a reason for it, is I'm chopping into the fibres, but I'm also trying to lift them up at the same time. Which is not necessary, it's just, I guess, a habit. Okay, so I'm just trying to establish the bowl, line things up. And then in regards to grain orientation, because it's already a bit of a bend, but I find I don't want too much short grain in the end of this handle, so I'm not going to chop right down into there. I'm actually going to try and keep it fairly straight. I don't know if that makes any sense. And actually what helps me have a nice, clear, clean cut here is you see where the bark is there and there. That was a rounded surface, so that actually the central area was left proud. And when it's dead square, the tendency can actually be to come in and hit right in here if you do a miss hit. So actually I find leaving kind of about a finger, and actually I'm not trying to aim back here, I'm actually aiming right in here. Okay, and then the same this side, and now you can see that I'm not really trying to hit that rim, I'm actually just trying to hit that there, because that rim ultimately will be blended in. And also what I'm doing is I'm using what's some people know as the slicey top edge, and I'm using this point here as if it's more like a pencil, and I'm imagining where that's going, and I'm imagining that it's actually doing that. And I'm doing it on the same as this side as well. Okay. Right. Okay, that looks all right. 3, and I'll be able to blend that in. But already I think it's looking kind of nice. You know, I like what's happening on there. And I suppose in terms of filming, maybe I won't spend so much time just sitting and looking, but definitely I'll be thinking, okay, where do I want to leave that like that? Do I like that? Shall I leave the bark on? You know, there's lots of decisions, but ultimately it's still a bit thick. But at least now I'm probably gonna, now it's looking a bit more like a spoon. I'm going to start adding a bit of the asymmetry in. And I'm doing that by making this till this kind of come round to into the bowl. And then this one. So anything that like that split happens, I'm not going to try and force my will onto it. I'm going to just see what it does, slow down, and try and figure out how I can work what I want to do with what the wood's tending to do. And now just to help me see, that, you know, just starting to add that asymmetry in. And I guess that's just it, I'm doing everything kind of slowly. So I'm just going to blend that in a little bit. And I want this transition to be fairly nice and smooth. Okay, and now I've got that 3-finger wide. I think now I can feel a bit more confident about removing some material at the back. Because I have found through looking at a lot of different people's spoons, making lots of different kinds of spoons and experimenting, that the most important thing is this underside. You can have a flat, completely flat top, okay? And if you've got a nice crank here that when sat on the table and pressed in the deepest part, as long as this flares up, if all of this is flat, it will work. It will be nice, it will feel comfortable, it will work in the bowl, everything like that. So actually that's maybe why I concentrate mostly on, I really want to get a nice curve going on there. I think that's what I end up fiddling with the most of, you know, where to put the deepest point and how to get a nice convex going there. And actually what you can see on this side, you can see the grain. You can see it running along here. So up here you can see that short grain. But what I'm going to do with the knife is I'm actually going to cut down into that so there's still plenty of as long a fibres as I possibly can. And depending on which wood you're using, you can go thinner or thicker. And what I think I've been seeing is a bit of a trend to go as thin as you possibly can, and I think sometimes that doesn't always work with the piece of wood that has actually been selected, and that in my experience it will eventually break. Unless you're using it like a dainty little pixie and you're only ever eating, I don't know, soup with it or something, and then immediately washing it up and treating it with utmost respect and care. I think ultimately, it's such a higher chance of it breaking. So what am I doing now? So now I'm trying to blend this facet in with this facet. And maybe that is a, I don't know, whatever degree angle that is all. So can you see that? So I'm trying to introduce that 3D. That's going around there. Gives me a bit of depth going on as well, because I like to leave things pretty thick for quite a long time. And maybe that simply comes from a lot of mistakes about going too thin. Especially with this area, especially around here, end up going too thin. Yeah, you see any of those splits pretty much are going to disappear. So let's begin to add a little bit more asymmetry. So I'm just adding something that's going to come long around that way and come long around that way. Okay, right. And this is the point where I think, well, I could just carve the bowl out, round that off, and actually it all feels pretty comfortable. But let's keep going. So 3 wide. And so now I'm creating the shoulder and the neck. And so I've already kind of got a guide with my fingers. So I'm thinking somewhere about here in this kind of realm. And what I tend to do is I start quite away. So I'm not starting right where I want to be. And I'm just breaking up the fibres, which is actually made easier because I've already tapered off there, so it's less likely to split a big chunk off into my handle. Okay, and then I can keep looking as well. And now this is when I begin to use the heel of the axe. And I was trying to think about, why does the heel of the axe work? And I think maybe it's just because it's closer to my hand, it's closer to my body, it's the thing that's going to hit first. If I do it this way, I'm going to have to really tip. So it means I can keep everything really nice and controlled. And the important thing here is that trying to create one nice clean cut on this shoulder, because it serves as two things. One, when it comes to the knife, you're not having to clean up lots of kind of areas. I can see what's happening. And also then it really helps the axe guide to that place that I want it. Okay, and then I'll measure again. And at this point, I'm actually changing where this comes up. I want this shoulder to be higher than this shoulder, and that's going to be a really important thing for giving me the particular asymmetry that I want. Okay, and then I'm always imagining about my finger for when I'm axing, that's how far I want to go. I don't want to go too much farther than that, because you'll see later why. Okay. And this is definitely where it can go wrong. So bump cuts can be good. But also just really kind of locking your body in. My hips are really over. I'm standing quite tall. And I'm looking over it, and I'm really trying to use my arm and everything as one. And I'm going really lightly as well. You know, I'm not trying to really bash hard. Unless I get to there. Okay. And why am I not using a saw? Maybe some people are thinking. My experience with saws is that unless I get my pencil out and I mark here and I mark here, I inevitably saw perfectly there, and then here I've sawn right across. So I find it a really I actually find I make more mistakes with a saw than I do with the axe. I find the axe just a little bit slower, a bit more gentle. So, yeah. Okay. Just breaking up those fibers. Let's just bring this down. And also, because I've kept the bowl like much wider, so I just did a tiny little miss hit there, but I know that's going to come off. I know that this is all going to be smaller. So that's why maybe if you're drawing something and trying to get up to a line that is your finished width and you make a miss hit, it's going to be a bit more devastating maybe. So now I'm just blending in that part of the handle. And I imagine if you've watched any of Zed's great videos before, you've seen that this block is becoming a stop. So I'm stopping there, okay? And the reason that I've broken up the fibers about 1 centimetre is because now I only have to go up to here. It's a bit like that saw cut, and then I can press down. And now when it comes to doing that bit, I can just rock and just remove those like that kind of guillotine. Okay, and I'm not really worried about removing that because it is all going to disappear. And now I've been practicing with my left hand. Left hand, you can probably see it's a bit harder, but so was my right hand at some point. Okay, and actually talking about using both hands for knife and axe. So I've just tried that, just spent like 30 seconds. Didn't feel that safe, didn't feel that comfortable, but it didn't feel crazy. But I'm going to go back to my dominant hand, but then I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep starting off with that. And that's eventually over several months is going to build up some good muscle and good technique for doing that. Okay, and now I've got all that space there. I'm just going to blend that in. And what I'm doing here is I'm really bouncing and swinging and flicking that axe, and I'm imagining this tip kind of coming across, you know, like that. And it's not going any further because I'm just locking my elbow and everything in place and just flicking that. Oh, I've got a little cut. It's probably from the block. Okay. And when I get a bit close like that, actually what I find tearing the fibers, because sometimes they'll just tear off instead of having to kind of do this. And something that I would often say to beginners or even intermediates is, if I hear this tap, 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 you either need to change the technique or you probably need to go to the knife, depending on where you are. Because tap, tap, tap with quite a heavy thing could easily be one cut with the knife, you know, one power cut. So something to bear in mind. But at the moment, let's have a look where we're at. It's kind of a funny little wiggly shape because I think the grain kind of dips around there. So I think a tiny bit more on the neck. Yeah, so obviously that's way too wide. Cool. What I've done, I've just spent a few minutes just trimming down the crank. That's pretty much all I've been doing, and we're almost done with the axe. And I do like to leave things a little bit thicker, but particularly, so this beech is fairly hard, so trying to do as much with the axe. But I'm not trying to do everything with the axe, because actually sometimes just tapping away trying to do loads with this really is the heavy tool. It's trying to remove quite a lot of material quickly, and now I think we're getting at the fine stage. And I'm just going to talk you through what my thoughts are. So I'm noticing that the grain, if you can see, is doing this kind of wiggly thing, and now I love going with the grain asymmetry. And if it did it feels good in the hand. The way it's wiggling feels good in the hand, and it'll fit with my design, so I'm happy to go with it. If it didn't, I would probably try and change my design and tweak it accordingly. But what I'm really focused on at the moment is the crank. Like, everything else is kept pretty square for now. I'm not really worried about trying to shape the bowl with the axe. I can do a lot of that with a knife. So all I'm really trying to do is get some thinness, and because I know this is wide, like it's too wide, I can go pretty thin, and as you can see, I'm rocking it and coming diagonal across and then almost directly across. And what that does is that when I look down at it, I can see what's going on. So when I'm doing the crank, instead of coming here, and sometimes what I find happens is I'll make a big miss hit, is that actually I can sometimes just gently come across, mainly to remove where the deepest part is, and I can really see exactly that line I want to create. And annoyingly, it does get stuck in the block quite a lot. And then the same thing here. I'm going to start with that bump cut, just to start, because that's where the long grain is, that's where the grain is going, and also it tells me what the grain is doing a bit. So this just makes it a little bit easier for the axe to remove material, but also it gives me the kind of angles I want running down to here, because I know that here eventually is going to be fairly flat. So I'm still working with those 3 facets, and now I'm going to come just behind and just knock off and blend. Now you can see there's a nice curve running all the way around there, and I'm leaving a little bit more. You can see here there's a bigger depth, because I know that I'm going to be coming down there, but because it's a lot wider than I need, I don't have to worry too much about going up there. And actually, to blend this surface in, I like this to be one nice smooth curve, is instead of trying to come this way, I can just come across and remove it across the grain, particularly across there. But you know, that's not really that important. I'm just thinking about now thinning it down slightly more towards the end. And just moving that again and trying to be really precise. And actually something that maybe more for beginners that I see is they get very scared and they end up pushing the axe through, is what I tend to teach on a course would be, well, first of all, just sort of aim for something. Like I'm going to aim for that wood chip, and just have a few little kind of practices there. And then, you know, I'm not actually trying to hit it, and then eventually I start shifting the axe over until I feel like I've got a consistent swing, and I find that kind of helps. But what you really want is you don't want to be doing this. If you can get a nice consistent swing, you're always lifting the axe up and swing it. I think swinging and slicing and having that good loose grip is always going to be good. And sometimes what I think I've been finding is a finger, if you've got an axe like this, a finger on there when you're doing that just helps stop that deflection. You know, if I do it there, it's more likely to ping off, and this is just helping direct exactly where I want it to go. You know, I can kind of get it into the wood a little bit more having that finger on there. But anyway, I think, yeah, I'm kind of still making decisions, but I think ultimately apart from just thinning that down a little bit more. See, this is that point that you end up going, oh, I just do that, and you're just doing these little taps with the axe, and actually a couple of strokes with the knife, and you would have done the same thing without having to hold this axe. But I'm being cautious of what the grain is actually doing. And then, so even on the handle, there's 3 facets going there, and I'm trying to leave this section here quite thick. Because like I said earlier, when we're looking at spoons, I like to play a lot with there, have a lot of decision making. But about a finger depth running through is pretty good. That's still quite thick there because I want to be able to get a nice curve. And maybe the bark's going to stay on, maybe it's not. So I think, so we don't end up faffing, let's move over to the knife. Right, now we're on to the knife. As you can see, it's still quite chunky, and my plan now is to just block in and kind of hone in on the shape, but also just tidy up these areas, see what the grain's doing. You know, there's a bit of tear out there. The main thing is it feels good in the hand so far. I've got plenty of room to play around with. But before I do that, I'm kind of doing this off camera, but I'm just generally stretching my hands a little bit, opening them up a little bit. And I don't do this that much, but I try and do it often. So I'm not doing it a lot or for kind of 10 minutes now I'm going to stretch. I'm just trying to actually just be mindful of it. So that's something that, especially after the axing, yeah, it's not a big deal, but it's definitely something.
So before you use your fancy knife, may I ask what knife it is that you're using?
Yeah, well, the story goes is that I did a thing for Ruach, and I was still using my old Mora knife.
And those who don't know what Ruach is?
Oh, sorry, is the Rise Up and Carve is these. I think it started in America, didn't it? There's a bunch of guys that were. They wanted to have a Zoom call where they could meet up, hang out, chat, carve together, and I think it was something about early in the morning or something. Anyway, yeah, definitely Rise Up and Carve, definitely check that out. And one of the regulars on there asked me about the knife I was using, and I said, oh, it's just an old Mora. He's like, oh, I thought that you've been a professional for a long time, you would have some fancy knife. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I have a nice fancy knife? That would be really nice. And I'd seen Adam Ashworth's knives, and the blade and everything looked good. But not only that, he does a 100mm length blade, and I'd always wanted a longer blade. Okay, so that then I felt like I had 2 knives in one. You know, it's got a nice long taper. Also, it's a pretty knife, and also I really liked the handles. I liked that they were a little bit different, and I was quite surprised at how comfortable this handle actually is, because it kind of flares out, it's quite big, but actually because of the facets it feels really, really nice, and I can do everything I need to do. Yeah, and it's pretty easy to sharpen. I have recently rolled the edge a few times, so if you see some marks on the wood. But yeah, it's a really good knife, and when I first did buy it, I did accidentally stab myself a couple of times, so that is something to bear in mind, but you know, you have to get used to everything. So where am I going to start? I'll either work from bowl to handle or handle to bowl, or kind of bounce around, but it's depending on what I see which is the biggest issue, and the handle is first. So I'm just going to work, and I could be doing this really anyway, but I'm simply just trying to tidy up areas. I'm not doing anything other than that at the moment. And one thing I'm trying to do is keep pretty much everything square. Because it's also I'm kind of investigating that, okay, the grain is a bit funny that way, so I need to come the other way. So in terms of making, you know, a spoon that we looked at and said, this is the spoon we're probably going to make, this piece of wood has said, no, you're not. You're going to do something slightly different. But that is definitely my style. So already, okay. So that's the handle sides, there's no tear out there. And now on the shoulders. Okay, Okay. So that's cleaned that up. And like I said before, I want this corner here to be lower than this corner here. And I want this shoulder to be lower than this shoulder, and that creates a really nice bit of subtle asymmetry. But first of all, it is a bit too wide. But I know I keep saying I keep leaving it wider, but I just feel that really gives me a lot of room to play. Because albeit I have a destination in mind, I really like to see what kind of happens. And I think I've always been kind of slowly catchy monkey. And so this edge is going to be a nice, long, slow kind of taper into that shoulder, and this one is going to be a far shorter and sharper one. And that then also creates that asymmetry. And I guess in terms of talking about asymmetry, thinking about it, I think I do still have a central point just about here in my mind's eye. Like there's always a central point. Sometimes it might move, but I'm always thinking, okay, there's my center, and everything either side of that can move around. Okay. And I'm just creating that long edge. And like I keep saying, I'm leaving things pretty much square. So I'm just doing that as a big straight line, which is something that I think comes from my fine art life drawing when I used to teach life drawing. And you kind of, with anything like that, you really block things in first. You go for big things, and it's the same with the axe. You do big things first. Okay, and now just start refining. And my plan with the crank is I like a really nice continuous curve that goes all the way convex, so it would still be convex here, and then just around, just beyond the neck, it kind of dips into concave. I like that kind of really subtle curves. Okay, just dressing that up, and as you can see, I'm kind of coming diagonally across. I find that a lot easier than trying to do this. And not only that, I can then perhaps create another facet that comes off. And this, for me anyway, has two things, is that, I don't know if the camera will be able to pick that up, but this line here is going to interact with this line here, and it's going to create a really nice shadow. So there's going to be a lot of accentuation and depth of the actual shape and the form with playing with shadow, I think. See it? Yeah, I can kind of see it. Anyway, that'll come back later. We'll kind of explore that later. And then you'll probably have noticed by now that I carve with left and right hand. And I would really encourage more people to just gently start trying that. Even if you're a beginner, you can really... The way I started was I would just mime it first, and I would try and get everything in the right position, and if it felt awkward, I would put it back in my dominant hand, and then I would do it and think, okay, how is that doing that cut? Okay, it's like that, and I would practice it, and then even if it felt awkward, I would try it just a little bit, and then I'd go back to my dominant, and I would just keep doing that. Okay, so we're just trying to round the back of the bowl. I'm trying to get a nice even curve with a nice central flat running through. I found that kind of nice shallow curve really works well in the mouth with that kind of central flat. Yeah, I think you could obviously tweak any of that. And now what's coming up is definitely, okay, trying to blend that surface in with this surface. And what I'm always imagining I'm doing is this knife is creating those shapes. So if I want a concave or I want a convex, so I'm trying to make that. And then here, I'm trying to go from that to that.
You know, I'm trying to make that action. It's almost like I'm trying to sculpt the knife around the piece of wood. Yeah, it's starting to look a little bit still very thick on the edge. And I guess one thing to say about facets and planning ahead is that I found I don't really have a strong inclination towards any particular kind of facets. I really like seeing what comes out of my technique in many ways. Don't know if that makes any sense. Like right now I'm watching what's happening. I'm thinking, oh, these facets are quite nice, and the way those facets run over there. And then all I'll do is I think I'll accentuate that. I'll now do that on purpose. But sometimes facets run differently, just depending on the wood, the shape. Okay, let's create one more there. Just make sure that edge is tidied. Still quite wide, so I'm just going to thin that down a little bit more. Yeah, I think I like this way of carving. It feels a bit more curious, a little bit more like discovery, a little bit more like play. But just a note on in terms of drawing and sketching and templates and whatnot, is I spent a long time drawing, okay? In fact, I'll try and find some of my old sketchbooks. I had pages, I'd be on the train, I'd be sketching ideas, I'd have a scrap piece of paper, I'd be drawing. Used to use centerline, measurements, everything. So I've gone through that. So it's not as if I just completely skipped that stage. I think it's a really worthwhile thing to be doing. I think for me, just what happened was that it felt like I was just trapped by templates and lines and measurements. And yeah, I just felt really kind of trapped. And I think coming from a fine art background, I really wanted to play. I really wanted to see what happened. So it's about not letting the wood dictate, but also kind of letting the wood have some influence, maybe.
So for those starting out, on the topic of templates, those starting out or kind of early on in the spoon carving journey, do you personally think that templates have their place for people in that position? Yeah,
because when you're learning, you know, maybe your first kind of 100, 200 spoons even, a template is just going to give you confidence. It's going to give you, you can just work right up to that line and know that that's good. I can go up to there. And then what that's going to do is going to then give your muscles, you know, your physical muscles and your kind of eye muscles, you're then going to be able to hone in on what looks good, what you like, what you don't like, and just how thick, how thin things can go. So then when you don't want to use a template, you've got a kind of reference point that's kind of inbuilt in your body. So yeah, I definitely, and from time to time, instead of using a template, what I would do is actually either buy a spoon or get a spoon, either that I've made or that someone else has made, and I would physically draw around that, and I have it next to me. And that's something that I teach at Spoonfest, is mimic a spoon, because I think it's a bit like, you know, a musician learning a piece, learning some scales, learning things like that. I think that can be really healthy, and I think that's kind of what a template is doing, really, you know.
Do you have a template that's suitable for beginners or people likes thereof? Absolutely,
yeah. I've got one that we can send out, and it'll be a nice asymmetrical one, so we can. And I did one for Ruach, and that seems to have been really well received.
With your permission, then, Dan, if it helps the viewers who are watching, could I make that available to them to download from your website?
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Let's get more people doing asymmetry. Yeah.
So guys, what I'll do is I will put a link below. So Dan very kindly now has offered his templates. So I'll put a link to a page on his website where you can download that. So that'll be amazing. That's very kind of you, Dan. Thank you.
No, it's great. I remember what it was like when I didn't know which way to go. So I think, and what's really beautiful for me anyway, is I really enjoy seeing people take it somewhere, in their own direction. I just want to lastly say before I move on to maybe hollowing it out, is with the rim, my plan is that this leading edge is fairly flat, and then what I'm doing is I'm tilting the knife this way and I'm swinging it around and I'm trying to create a long curve. So that curve is actually beginning here, but the plan is that the curve is happening here, but I'm beginning it here, and then I'll show you in a second. Okay, so it doesn't need to happen in one go, and then I'm tilting the knife this way as well, so it's kind of 2 to 3 things happening. And then as I do that, I can almost come up the grain, and then what I would do is about 1 centimeter in the neck, I would begin that transition there. Because I've found if you try and start anything at a curve too soon, you'll just end up more with kind of doing that annoying chasing the grain back and forth. And that now you can see where I've left the depth on the side. That's given me a lot of room to play and drop this, and that's also adding crank. Okay. And I'll just do it on the other side, and then I'll show you actually, what's the view called where you look kind of down it from the end? What is that view called? You've got plan view and side view. Do you know, Zed, what that's called?
I don't. That's a really good question.
Yeah, so some comment that I've actually had quite a few times is, how did you do that cut in one go? Because it looks like it's one facet with one knife cut, but actually it's that blending of cuts in. So it's not actually one cut. It's just one kind of facet, I guess. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this, but when you look down there, you'll see that these drop away. Let me just check what I'm talking about. You can see that they kind of drop away like this, and I can accentuate that even more. And I found that, so they're dropping away that way and this way. So they're going from a flat, and they're dropping away like that, and then they're coming back up. And I found that when you put that in your mouth, that creates that lollipop feel of, it's kind of popping out. Yeah, and already still a bit wide. So I think what I'm going to do now is just try and fix the bowl a little bit more, because I've kind of got my datum there, and I just want to start thinning things down a little bit and just refining and blending. This is the long edge. Okay, and I'll accentuate this even more. And now all I'm going to do is blend this in to the shoulder, because I want this to be a nice long kind of edge. So I kept it square up until now. Okay. Yeah. And this is the shorter one. And that's the beauty of being able to carve with both hands, is that I can just keep checking if I've got it how I want.
If people are just going to be focusing on carving with a dominant hand, what they do, just spin the other way around and then?
Yeah, you can definitely be doing thumb pushes and things like that. I think what I used to do before I was doing that, so I would do that side dominant, is that then I would flip it over. But I find that so difficult. I really can't express enough, just start trying to use your non-dominant hand. Even if it feels really weird, give yourself a year. A year is nothing. You live till you're 80 years old, and 1 year out of that you spend time struggling a little bit. I really think it's It's good for your hand. It's good for being able to really see what you're doing. You know, because that's one of the reasons I started doing it more, is that my dominant hand was really starting to hurt, so I wanted to relieve it. Okay. Right, I've just got to focus now. So now I'm going to be looking at the side profile a lot, the handle. You know, I don't know if you can see there that it's a bit of an annoying bump there. It needs to be blended in a little bit more. So I think I'm going to try and, I don't want to get lost. So I'm just going to try and blend that. And I find that this kind of tapering, so I'm starting from a flat, and then I taper really gently down, and I taper really gently down that way, and then that flat kind of continues, and that's creating a nice curve, but it's also creating some nice kind of facets. And it really, for me, it really is about where this deepest bump is, and how long it is, and how smooth. Right now it still doesn't ride so smoothly with the top. So I would probably end up spending a lot of time faffing. Right, here we are. I've just been fiddling around getting this transition a bit smoother. I want a nice long curve, I don't want a kind of little bump there. And all I've done is thinned the handle down a little bit, still feels nice and comfortable. The kind of shape is almost where I want, but now the really important thing is this neck. I'm going to do the neck and then the bowl. And you'll see now why I've left it a little bit wider. And so to start up here, I'm actually going to start on the back, and I'm actually going to produce something a little bit like this with these kind of nice little facets that once again remind me of kind of shells and things like that. But it's also just a kind of a nice way of dealing with these areas. And so all I'm going to do is start small. And can you see, I think this is fairly common these days, that if you take away a corner, it's easier than taking away big surfaces. And quite a steep angle, like it's not at 90 degrees to that top surface. I'm just trying to then blend that in and come in. And I'm being mindful that I'm not going too far on there because I might want to drop that. And now I'm going to come back at the same angle down the handle. And what I'm doing here is I'm pulling down and I'm trying to kind of scoop. And I'm trying to come out of the cut before I get too close to there. Let's see, and then I can keep coming back. And then the main thing actually that's going on here is, one, I'm using the tip of the blade, but I'm really twisting this. I'm trying to kind of pivot in a very small way. I'm not trying to do a big arc. I'm actually just trying to twist the knife in that motion and in that motion. And as soon as it gets stuck, that tells me where the grain is. It tells me I need to come back. And the handle is, it's wider than I is going to end up, so I don't worry too much about how thin I go there. Okay. So do that on that side. Then I'll come back and I'll do it on the other side. So I'm just starting at somewhere around that deepest point just there, and I'm not going right up to the edge. I'm always trying to, at this stage anyway, trying to leave myself room just in case the grain does something like that. It suddenly kind of splits off. And once again, I'm also not trying to pull right into it. I'm sort of coming at this direction, and I'm really trying to skew that. Because I'm just thinking the pinch point wants to be here, so that's where my tip really is pivoting, and then I can come into the handle. And then actually what I like that I don't know if the camera's picking up, that this is higher than this. So the asymmetry is also working on the back, which is something I really like. Okay, and now you can see what that's done is left a small little area there. Okay, this is not such a big wide area anymore. And now it means that I know that this area is going to be tight. So I'm going to start back here and try and blend that in. And it's going to immediately catch, but that's fine because the handle's wider. Maybe about 1 centimetre ahead. I'm digging in, I'm coming out. And I'm just taking little shavings until I feel like I'm starting to come to there. Okay, that's going to hit that. And already now, so I reckon one more pass. And I'm also pulling this knife down to try and create as much slicing action as possible and really utilising that thin tip. Okay, and then in a second, we will have... There we go. And now we've got a nice curve there, no fibres really, and it's all nice and blended in. And now what I can do is I can repeat that, but what I want to do here to create my asymmetry is this is going to be a much tighter curve. Okay. So I'm just trying to create that tight curve really, and I'm also pressing the bevel, the cutting edge. I'm pressing that fairly hard on there. I'm squeezing fairly hard and slicing. And I'm trying to really stop before. Like it's actually just that swinging motion which is really creating the cut. Okay. Okay, that's pretty much there. I think it's one of those areas you can do a heck of a lot of faffing. Okay, let's do this side. This side's usually a little bit trickier. And because I know that this shoulder is actually, I want it to be higher than this shoulder, but I want it to be a longer curve, I've already sort of imagined in my mind where everything's going to line up, so I'm starting it here. Okay. And then I'm doing the same thing I did on the other side, but I'm making it longer. I want this side of the spoon to create that kind of jaunty asymmetry. I tend to do everything longer. Everything's a bit of a longer, straighter, slower curve. And you'll see it's the same technique. And I guess bearing in mind if you're not swapping hands, the thumb push just fine. Just find it a bit harder to see. And sometimes the knife blade maybe is in a different orientation. I'll try and explain what I'm talking about there a bit. And now I'm going to blend this shoulder into that. There's still a little bit of a cut there, and I know I want this to be a nice long slow curve, so and I've still got plenty of material, and now you'll see me hit that in there. But but what I'm trying to do there is actually beginning all the way over there. There we go. And now it's blended. And I guess it depends on how thin, or narrow should I say, you want that. There you go already. That's created that kind of jaunty angle. And now that's made that I need to blend that in. And this whole bowl is still really wide. Like it's still three fingers. Yeah, it's still really wide. But that's great. I'm really glad it's still wide because it means I can really keep looking, and I've got plenty of wood to play with the shape that I want. I don't have to squeeze into something. Okay, that's just. And now I'm gonna make everything rounded. Like up until this point, I've kept everything pretty square on and only blended certain aspects. There we go. I think that rounded there, it's a nice kind of curve. And that curve matches that curve. You've got all these kind of curves that I think kind of match. And in terms of using it in the mouth, I found that you really want a nice long curve coming into here, because usually your mouth actually ends up, you don't eat, well, some people maybe do, but straight in that way. Most people are kind of scooping and they're off to the side. So I'm imagining when you're pulling out that way, I'm checking with my lips of where is it catching, and actually that's fine, it's catching a little bit on here. So just taking off, trimming off that little corner, bringing that asymmetrical bit there a little bit further. Right, and then I think this is probably where I would faff quite a lot. But I think for the sake of the video, I'll just thin this neck down a little bit more. Just 1 minute, and then we'll get onto the bolt. And one decision I am going to make before the bolt is I'm going to take this bark off, because I don't like, there it looks quite nice, but there I'm not so sure, which now has made me rethink that. No, okay, let's keep it on for a bit. So now I'm going to go on to the spoon knife, and really you can use any spoon knife, it really doesn't make much of a difference. This just happens to be a really old Nick Westerman faucet blade that I bought before he had a waiting list for an eternity. Yeah, we're going to see. And I have quite a few knives now, I guess. I've been doing this for 10 years, so I'm still playing around with techniques, which knives work. But this nice kind of open curve here seems to create, is nice for roughing out. And I have one other knife, and I create one, get a bit of a depth. I'll blend that in that side. And this is still just roughing out. Okay. And blend that in, and I'm leaving space at the sides. I'm not going too far, leaving that leading edge there. And now what I'm going to try and do is I'm really going to try and just twist this, because I really want a nice curve going into there. And I'm starting it almost right back at where I want it to be. And you can see that I'm using the flatter part of the blade. And what I'll end up doing is going slightly in this direction and then slightly in that direction to get both of those shoulders. And I must admit, even to this day, I still find doing these shoulders and getting them nice and clean and the depth I want, I still find it a bit tricky. It's not something that I've got my technique down on, I think. And actually the other technique that I would often use, which I really like, is really just coming across. And because of the shape of the blade, and I'm twisting it, and I'm trying to use that rounded part of the blade there to give me a bit of depth on the shoulder. And you can see that probably there's a little kind of scratch mark, because I think I went through a knot or something, and even the most recent sharpening hasn't got rid of it. But you can see how that starts to give a nice kind of shadow there. And now I can try and blend in the sides a little bit more. And just trying to use the shape of the blade as well to actually help me create. Because I know for some people they'll draw their design on, and then that knife has to fit in that design. But That's almost roughed out. And I'm not quite sure how to explain what I'm doing at this edge, but it's definitely doing some twisting, trying to skew that around. Maybe actually just watching the video will help you. And now, so from kind of tilted up, I'm now dropping that and using this whole length because it's still a curved blade, and I want all this part of the bowl to be fairly shallow, because hopefully that's going to give me that, what Fritjof Rundhol refers to as the lollipop feel, which is where you just want it to slide out your mouth completely, kind of unimpeded. You don't want anything snagging. And then I'm going to try and make my deepest point kind of a nice area over there. And here, you can probably see I'm really pivoting the knife to come across. I'm not trying to just scoop right across. And this is certainly where you could faff for a long time. God, I really couldn't get rid of that. But even at this stage, this green wood, you know, it was cut a few days ago. The log's probably been down for at least a few weeks. The finish that I'm getting off this sharp knife would be enough. It'd be absolutely fine. Even this finish, any of these bumps, that would be totally fine. Okay, so I'm just trying to go up to my line, leaving a couple of mil. Because what I've found is if you have quite a steep transition on that inner rim to the bowl, that ends up getting quite furry if you leave that really thin. So my intention is then to come along and just either with the curved blade is to kind of trim that off so it rolls out of the edge. So I think we're almost there with the bowl. I'm just trying to make sure that the line of that inner rim matches nicely to the outer rim. And I'm not necessarily trying to leave an even rim all the way around. I want a little bit of thickness back here, around there, and then it can drift right off pretty much there. And I think it's good to play around with kind of how thick, how thin you leave that. But I can start going almost right off the edge there. And I like quite a slow curve into that bowl. I know some people have really steep. And I think for what happens is that when you're putting it in your mouth, if that's really steep, my lip will end up catching that, dropping, and then you're trying to scoop the food off there. But if it's a nice shallow curve, yeah, I just find that's a lot kind of nicer. So I will end up dropping that into there a little bit more. However, if you have a steep drop into that bowl, it does look nicer. Doesn't necessarily work nicer, but you know, for your Instagram, it looks even sweeter. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and then for that leading edge, I really am dropping this and using the shape of that to almost come right off, because what I want is I want these two surfaces to be more almost like a wedge. And so my finger just comes right off. Yeah, that's already better. Just taking that bit off there, and then I can blend that in. Great, here we are, kind of at a stage where we're just thinking about what to do next. The bowl's pretty much done, but putting it in my mouth, still got a bit of refining to do, and now I think I want to drop this back rim here. And if I do that, I really need to take off this bark and drop that in just to create a nice smooth curve in there. So let's go ahead and do that.
So you're going in at angles? and facets.
No, I'm just removing the bark and how it's coming off. So the bark was curved, so I'm literally just trying to remove the bark first, not trying to do any cuts. I just want to see what it looks like and how it feels without the bark. So yeah, oh yeah, that actually already looks nicer. Yeah, and now, oh yeah, that does look nicer. So that's kind of already thinned down the handle for me a lot. And now what I'm going to do is just drop. But you see, okay, so something, I don't know if it's picking it up on there. Can you see this kind of little angle of where the bark meets this change in angle? That's something that I would pick up on and think, that's kind of nice. Maybe I can incise that area and cut into there and just make a feature of that. I'm not going to do it for this video because it'll end up being 3 days long, not 3 hours. But it's just, I think it's nice to let you know my thought process. And in terms of the handle, I'm simply just trying to make it slightly rounded on top and a bit more rounded underneath. Because I think a flat-topped handle is not always the most comfortable. Okay, so I'm just trying to blend that in. And now I'm going from a convex to a concave. I'm trying to imagine that. Just doing those two sides. Blend that in, it'll leave a little triangle in the middle, and then I'll come down. And then actually what this does is that if I then blend that in, it actually makes a really nice curve on that inside rim. Helps kind of accentuate that. So now I'm just going to be dropping that. So it seems like what I'm noticing is that I tend to work in threes almost all the time. You know, 1, 2, 3. And then blending things in. Okay. Yeah, I think already that looks a lot nicer. And then all I'll do, so I'm just going to feel it first. Yeah, I could definitely do a bit more. So let's do a little bit more on there. Because doing this then has an effect on what we do around here. But you see, I've still got plenty of room to keep dropping this if I feel the need to.
So this is why you keep certain elements a little bit thicker.
Of course, yeah. There you go. And now, because I really like those nice long flowy curves, and I think it's not only for looks, it's also because it just works better in the mouth. And now, oh yeah, that's already better. I know my lip's not going to catch there. So finally for the handle, if I just kind of hollow it a little bit, and I tend to like to hollow with an asymmetrical hollow, which you'll see what I mean in a second. So this is a nice long facet here. This is a bit shorter because this is usually where your thumb goes. Okay, and that just feels nice that this is dropped away at a longer than this one, and this one can be a little bit steeper. And then what I'll actually do is match that up on that side, and there'll be an asymmetrical facet. And I find that really is comfortable in the hand. So now let's get on to now I've got that pretty much how I want. I'll just refine the shoulders a little bit more. Okay. So now let's do these kind of facets so we can go back to these. And I think the important thing here is to remember that, yeah, you can draw the facets, yeah, you can be super kind of picky. I find if you just want to be consistent with facets but not necessarily be really picky with it, is just repeat your bodily action. I'm just going here, I'm going here, I'm not changing any direction. Maybe I'm just making that cut a little bit longer, that's all. Okay. And then the same thing here. So even though I'm not doing the whole cut that I want, I'm just repeating the action. I know that eventually, there we go, I'll get onto it. Yeah, and I really like having a little kind of asymmetrical facets on the back as well. And blending that in. Blending that in. Okay, and now what I'll do is, I don't know if you can see, there's that line there and that line there. I'm going to try and accentuate that a little bit to kind of create a facet running down there. And now, so that depth there, what I tend to like doing is coming around, and this kind of creates a little bit more depth, a little bit more dimension, kind of accentuates that curve a little bit more as well. Okay, see, now it's created a curve which I can come back and accentuate even more if I want to. But now what I can also do is simply create another one. Taking off that corner now creates a second facet, and I could do that all the way up. I could do two, I could do them bigger, smaller, but it also serves the purpose of refining the back here to marry up with what's happening there. You know, don't need it so chunky. And then I think finally, I'm just going to do that on this side. So it's kind of wrapping around the spoon somewhat as well. Okay. And we'll blend that in to that. And now this, I'm going to try and wrap around. I'm kind of thinking of what's happening on that inside of that bowl. I'm going to wrap around there. I'm going to wrap around there. And I'm never really too worried about making perfect facets, but I do like facets that are working to create a comfortable mouthfeel. Okay, we want a nice long taper. I think finally for the back here, I mean, I would definitely do more refining, but I think to watch that is going to be like watching paint dry. So now, instead of looking, I'm just investigating with great TV. So it still feels a little bit wide, and then just here it's a little bit thick. You know, I can feel my bottom lip catching, and that really is something that I think would be really good for more people to end up doing, is really investigating with how, you know, this is something that you are making to put in your mouth. So at this stage, when it's hollowed out pretty much, is to really begin actually investigating what needs to happen. Yeah, so it's still a little bit thick around there. And I guess the thing that you might find a little bit tricky is, well, do I take material away from here, or do I take material away from here, or is it a bit of both? And yes, the answer is a bit of both. So I can still feel it there, and then when I look down it this way, I can see that's a nice shape. You know, I'm fairly happy with how that shape is looking, and it tapers really nicely up there. And I think now, let's just refine, I think, because when I look down it that way, I can see that there's a bit more depth there, and actually it's quite flat there. So I think taking just a little bit of this, not too much off the back there, but just taking a little bit more middle out, I think will be good. And I'm still gently coming up to that rim, staying away from the edges. I don't want to make these edges much steeper. Just want a little bit more depth. And then I can just blend it in. And coming across the grain like this, even when it's green, if you've got a nice sharp polished tool, you don't need to come down the grain or anything like that, and any lumps and bumps is totally fine. Oh, that's better already. Yeah, I can feel that my lip wants to be there a little bit more, and then let me just now bring that line back up. And obviously this is the deepest point, somewhere in that third, and it's going to be the deepest point in the back of the bowl as well. So I do want to make these shoulders just a little bit deeper, just to marry up with that. Yeah, for me it's all about balancing curves, depth and shape and feel. I think this bit was always the most tricky bit for me, and I did used to come across this way, but then I'd always dig in there. So I found, particularly with this knife, works quite well, is that I can start on the edge and really try and slice and skew with a lot of pressure, and really try and kind of come out of the cut quite quickly, because I used to dig in quite a lot there. So apart from this curve as well, I want to kind of come up here to really accentuate that curve with those other curves, which really is an aesthetics thing. It's not really that important. I suppose it gives your lip a little bit more space. And as you can see, I'm not really creating any more depth. I'm just trying to create a nice curve going there. I think... And because I want this to be a little bit higher than that up there, yeah, I'm going to need to come back and sort that neck out. But I think apart from that, so one last feel. Yeah, so I think apart from blending these sides off so they're not as steep going down, blending those sides off, and then apart from blending these corners a little bit more, that is good for the bowl. Great, right, let's see where we're at. So off camera I've just been doing a little bit of refining of the handle, thinning it down a little bit, starting to change the angle, and now it's kind of, the spoon is pretty much there, feels pretty good in the mouth, but there are a few little details that I just want to refine, and a few kind of maybe more aesthetic decisions to make. So where are we? I'm fairly happy with how the crank is working out. And what I'm going to do is just finish shaping the handle. So I usually leave the handle till kind of last. And what I'm going to do is just a little bit of hollowing to start. Maybe create some facets. And this is doing two things. It's making the handle even comfier. And what I'm doing is actually swinging the knife like this and twisting it like this. Okay. And then what I would probably end up doing is then dipping it all the way down to that side to create a facet that moves. Okay, and then that'll just blend in to there. And I don't always do this, but it's something that is quite nice. Just kind of creates another shadow, another little dimension. Kind of pinches that neck without losing material as well. Just blending that in. Okay, and now that's created a few nice little facets, and I think on the back, still a little bit of weight up here, but it's okay, it's not tearing out so much anymore. And this is definitely something that I think is pretty subjective, is how thin do you go? How comfortable, but for me I'm always testing it in my hand, and what's happening already on here this sharp edge is kind of catching on my hand, so let's just blend. I'll just go back to these, and I think what we'll do is we'll just do this on one side maybe. So I'm just blending that into that facet, and now I'm coming around and just blending that one, and in it, all the while it's changing angle. It's going from steep and shallow. See there, it goes quite steep, and now it starts to go shallow and blend into there. I really like facets that move, that do something. Okay, and then this is going to go from shallow to steep, just so it's a bit more comfortable, but then it also creates quite a dynamic facet there. And already now, I like what's happening there, this kind of movement going through the handle. So now I've got to think about the end of the handle, the length of the handle. So I'm just going to remeasure, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's put a bird in there. And so the little bird kind of silhouette is a pretty good way of creating an asymmetrical end to the handle. Yeah, and what I like is that this here is, and then this little curve, and this is pretty much how the grain sort of dictated. It was in that wiggly way. And so in most of the same way, I end up just creating two lines because I'm not trying to actually I'm not trying to do a silhouette of an actual bird. I'm just trying to be quite kind of impressionistic, I guess. And I think the curve of it actually then mirrors. And so I'm just going to drop the tail a little bit. And I like to have a little bit of a flat before swooping up and a nice long swoop up to the head. Okay. And then what I like to do is just suggestion of a beak going on. Yeah, I think that's kind of... Okay, yeah, that's starting to look pretty good. Yeah, you can see a bit of a beak happening, and then all I'm going to do is blend that into that, and then we'll blend that into the head. Yeah, I think that looks fairly nice. I think it's still, this end is still too wide for this bowl. I still feel like it's a bit wide, and I want to just thin that down a little bit. Seeing the grain is already kind of popping off there. So that means I'm going to need to come back. And something I will say is I'm not completely kind of happy about some of the things, but ultimately not every spoon turns out to be a banger, especially when you're being filmed for the first time, or second time, I guess. Yeah. But I do quite like the way the grain has dictated some asymmetry itself. And this is something that I think some people want to do, this like long thing like this. They create one shaving, it looks really nice, definitely. But I think in terms, I kind of do this little rubbing thing, and I'm gently, slowly changing, and I'm just taking off high spots, and I'm trying to slowly create a curve that kind of looks a bit pleasing, at least to my eye. Yeah, okay. Anyway, right, so now we're definitely getting into maximum faff of just doing things that I think look nice. But now we've changed that. Yeah, there we go. And by doing this beak, all I'm doing is just pressing and really just twisting, really quite rapidly. I'm not really trying to cut in, I'm just letting that blade pivot around. Bit of blending. Yeah, I'm fairly happy with that. This edge is still a bit too bulky. Okay, so at this point, what am I doing? I'm faffing, definitely. But I'm just refining, and I think that is maybe one of the differences from a beginner to an intermediate to someone more experienced, is that I kind of know how to achieve. And on these rounder bits, I'm doing that kind of rubbing. I'm pressing the bevel up against there. I'm just going back and forth, and every time I'm just turning. Okay, they're kind of like little straight cuts because I'm gently blending and gliding it around. And that is kind of how I would draw as well, actually, so maybe that's where that comes from. Okay, blending that in a little bit more. And now, apart from thinning this down, so I find nice wide facets here, really good on the back of the handle. Okay, and we're going from a convex to a concave. And I really like facets that change width as well. Okay, I think the grain's going to catch a bit there, yeah. So we'll sort this out. I'll do the same thing on there, but ultimately. So I'm going from steep, and then I'm flattening it out. And at the same time, I'm then beginning to scoop this way a little bit more. So there's quite a lot going on in one cut. But that's definitely, and I think a 2 mil line around there will give me the ability to then trim off these corners, because ultimately any sharp corner is eventually going to catch, create a fluffy edge, you know, over time, washing up, all that kind of thing. Because I do see some people just leaving raw edges, but I don't think that's good practice, really. But yeah, depending on how you wash up your spoons or whatever, you might always end up with some fluffy edges, depending on how you end up washing up. Okay, so it's just refining. I'll stop refining now and faffing, but yeah, just tiny thinning that down a bit. But ultimately now I'm far more happy with that shape there. You know, it's coming around. That's still a nice curve. And, you know, I would end up refining this a little bit more. So convex, concave, and almost going back to convex again. So it's got a nice bit of flow to it, a bit of movement, and the facets are changing. So it's quite a dynamic profile as well as a plan view, okay? And so lastly, all I'm going to do, partly because I just want to introduce this knife, so this is a matte white, I can't remember, I think he calls this does he call this a mellow? I can't remember what he calls this. But it's a nice open sweep, and I had to go with one of these, an Israeli friend, Juan, he had one. And I tried it, and I just said, oh, that does exactly what I've been wanting it to do.
So Matt White, for those who may not be familiar, who's Matt White?
Matt White is a guy. He's a guy in America. Yeah, he's a tool maker predominantly. He carves a nice spoon, but he's predominantly a tool maker. He's definitely worth a follow because he's doing some really interesting things with some carving, what are they called, like flick knives type things. But he's been around for quite a while, and he's been working with Emmett Van Drysch of really getting a good spoon knife. And obviously you can see it's hollow ground, so it's easier to sharpen, and it's got a pretty little leaf in there. But also the handle's super nice as well. So the reason that I really enjoy this one is actually the shape of it. Let's look at that. So actually, if I just ever came across that shape, would be a really, really sweet bowl shape. You know, I wouldn't have to do too much there to create a really nice, sweet bowl shape. But then the other thing that I do like it, because it's a long blade, is actually when this is the way that a lot of people will finish a bowl. I do a bit of both. Sometimes if I get a really nice finish coming across the grain, I'll finish with that. But the great thing about this knife is that it really comes in and out of the cut really smoothly, and I think it's really important that coming in and out. So I can really get a nice curve that just meets. So this is completely green wood, and I can already, so there's no fibre, like it's such a nice finish. And because of the shape of the curve, it gives me a nice even curve all the way around. Like the Westerman blade that I was using is steeper on one end. Yeah, I seem to be able to just get really nice fine. Okay, I think apart from a million bit of faffing, let's just put that. Now all I would do, refine shape, just refine anything. But just lastly is taking off these corners. I think you really want to take a nice shaving off all the way around there, and when it comes to here.
So you chamfer all the edges?
Yeah, and so I'm not just chamfering them thinking, I have to do that, that's something I have to do. I'm actually thinking about all the experience I have of using them, what they look like after a year, 5 years, 10 years. And I know that those are danger areas, so I know I really need to chamfer because it really does protect that kind of grain. And same thing on the other side. So yeah, I would then chamfer all the way. And then I think, apart from that, lastly, I think if you do want to create a spoon that really kind of pops in a way, I've seen a lot of people they'll just do this micro chamfer all the way around. And that's totally fine. But one thing I do quite like to do is to see the way that chamfer now goes to a wide chamfer that then disappears, is that chamfer doesn't have to be just a little trim off all the way around. It can be thick and it can be thin in different areas. And then finally, I would then end up taking that little bit off as well. Because around here is where it can fluff up quite a lot as well. So with a nice thin blade and a very sharp blade, you can just come around and just take that off, and you could even then take it off there as well. But yeah, just tending to those areas, I think means your spoon's going to last a while. It's not going to fluff up as much. Yeah, a few little areas that I'll probably do, but finally I like to chamfer off this in quite a big way. And what this does is now when I hold it, if someone holds it up there, there's not a really sharp bit that holds there. And it also kind of lightens it as well. I like that kind of. And then I'll chamfer this. And the way I chamfer this is really skew the knife. And all I do is twist, follow it around, and twist once there. Because what I like is that this chamfer kind of appears, it changes size. It just gives another shadow. Anyway, I'm rambling. I think in all intents and purposes, another 10-15 minutes on this, and I'd probably be really, really happy with it.
So to wrap up the video, a couple of final topics to discuss, if I may. First and foremost, drying. What is your personal preferred method for drying spoons? Drying spoons. So I like to get on a big boat, big sailing boat, and I like to just hold it up to the wind. How long for about 3 weeks? Well, it depends on how big the spoon is. A ladle obviously takes like, it really, there's so many variables. It's not just this is how you dry a spoon. It's, okay, we're in the UK. So I'm predominantly talking to people in the UK. In Edale, it's a bit colder, there's more moisture in the air, it's a bit more humid. London is dry as hell, it's very, very different. So depending on your environment,
it's moist and damp. What does that mean? It means that the drying in general is going to be slower in natural air. So right now, because I've been touching it as well, I've been taking quite a bit of moisture slowly away from it as well. You know, it's a bit of a cold day. I'll just leave this on the table. Now I just sling it on the table and I'll come back. Even in a few hours, and I'd come back and that would be dry enough to do any kind of really finishing cuts. But you know, leave it overnight or whatever, that's the kind of classic thing. If I'm in London and it's super dry, all I would do is probably just either put it in the fridge, or I would just put it in a cool, dark place somewhere, you know, out of direct sunlight, something like that, I think would be absolutely fine. If it's a different kind of spoon, or maybe you're more precious, maybe just a like a fabric bag, put it in that, because then it's breathable, okay? And then leave that somewhere. If it's really hot and it's kind of sunny and you're worried about that. Yeah, I think spoons, they don't, unless it's the heat of the summer, yeah, it might crack on the end here, but yeah, I mean, okay, so if it is the heat of summer and it is really hot outside, then maybe then you want to put it straight away in the fridge or do something like that. I hope that kind of makes sense. I hope from that you can glean something from that.
And kind of following on from that, the last question is regarding oiling. What's your personal preference for oiling spoons?
So I've tried a lot of different oiling, and I've actually, okay, let's start from not oiling at all. If you took care of this and you didn't put it in the dishwasher and you didn't wash it up with super hot things, with loads of soapy things, and you took care of it, you wouldn't need to oil it, okay? However, if you're like a lot of people and you forget and it's in water, or, you know, things like that, or you forget to wash it up, whatever, then I use Emmett Van Drijs's mix of beeswax, 1 part beeswax, 2 parts jojoba, or jojoba, depending on how you pronounce that. And I like that because it really does give a nice waterproof thing. The jojoba, Emmett said it never fully cures, but I think with the mixture of beeswax, it seems to work just fine. I mean, I'm not a techie person. I'm definitely more arty. So it works. It doesn't have any color. It doesn't really smell at all. And I'll just get a little bit of that. I'll wipe it all over the spoon. And then if I've got a microwave to hand, I'll put it in the microwave for 12 seconds. 12 seconds seems to work, I don't know. And you'll get it out and it'll be hot, it'll be bubbling, and I leave it. This also works with the oven. So just translate microwave to oven. You'll get it out, it'll be hot. The oil and everything will be bubbling. And then I leave that, and if I notice there's any pools that haven't, I'll just rub it in. But I try and let everything soak into the wood. I've tried tung oil. That's good because it doesn't have much of a color, doesn't change, but it does have a strong smell and it does stick around for a while, but it is kind of cheap. And then there are other things like the cold pressed linseed oil, but the next one I'm going to try is hemp seed oil. Apparently it goes on green and it freaks you out. You think, oh my God, my spoon's going to be horrible and green. But then that doesn't have much smell. I think it cures fairly quickly, like a few weeks. That will be pretty good cure. Ultimately, don't use anything that, you know, like olive oil or anything. These are all things anyway. God, the minefield of oiling. Yeah, I think once again, I hope you can glean something from that. Yeah. Oh, it's good.
So there you have it, my friends. That is a wrap for this video. Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zed. It's been a real pleasure.
The honour has been all mine, truly.
Some of it's been mine.
Okay, we can discuss the ratio afterwards. So this is the second time, only the second time you've been on video teaching.
Yeah.
An absolute natural. Honestly, thank you so much. That has been amazing.
Yeah,
Even
it's
for
been
me
fun.
to see your entire process, which I've not seen, and it's in the entirety. So guys, just a few final things to kind of wrap up on this video. Number one, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we have timestamped all the various sections. Once again, this is a long video, but as you've seen, there's a lot to cover. So if you look at the bottom of this video, you can see the various timestamps, take you you to different sections. Also in the description below this video, you've got all the timestamps listed out. Once again, if you click on the time part on the left-hand side, that will take you straight to that part of the video. It's a very cool feature from YouTube. The other thing to remind you of is that I will be putting a link down below to Dan's Instagram. All I ask is if you get any value from this video whatsoever and you're inspired in some shape or form with what Dan has taught, then please do give him a follow on Instagram. And if you do carve anything in resemblance or inspired by what Dan has showed you, it'll be awesome for you to tag Dan, for Dan to see. I've done videos from years ago that I'm still getting tagged in with people who are replicating and being inspired by. So please do give him a follow down below as our way of saying thank you to Dan if you got any value from this video whatsoever. And also, the final thing is that, as mentioned, discussed throughout this video, and at the stage when we were kind of drawing and axing out, Dan has very kindly said he's going to put together a template for you guys to use, which is very generous of you, Dan. We really do appreciate that. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a link below in the description and pin to the top of the comments, taking you to that page on Dan's website where you can access the template. And also, if you look around the website, you're going to be able to see a gallery page, right?
Yeah.
Where you've got a myriad of pictures. Trust me, Dan is a prolific carver. Like I said, he's full time, right? It's what he does for a living, both teaching and also making. So he's a very prolific carver. So on his Instagram, you're going to be able to see a myriad of things, but also on his website, he has that gallery page. So like I said, with the template, link down below. And last but not least, we are in the process of, after recording this video, going to be filming hopefully 2 other videos. We're going to be looking at stretching techniques for spoon carvers. And the third video is another meaty video where we're going to be looking at Dan's entire process for carving a wooden bowl with hand tools. You had a sneak preview at the very beginning when we looked through the myriad of spoons Dan has carved. And on that table, you can see some bowls. So Dan is going to be teaching that bowl carving in a separate video, something which I'm also looking forward to seeing myself. So before we wrap up, Dan, are there any final words from you to those that are watching, be they beginner, intermediate or advanced, and any kind of words of wisdom or advice from you?
The only thing that I really would like to encourage people to do is explore your own ideas, get inspiration from nature, and just be playful, be curious. Yeah, I think that's it really.
Yeah, Dan is a living embodiment of that. Honestly, he really is. You see his work; he's so playful, and that's what I love about it. You've really stamped your own kind of way of doing things. It's something we spoke about, I think, off camera, where it's always good to see craftsmen and women, especially spoon carvers, exploring, being creative, testing things out, really kind of pushing the boundaries. But I'm always inspired by your work, Dan.
Great, thanks, Ed.
There you go, man. It's on video now. It's proof now that I've complimented you. So I am joking. Right, guys, that's a wrap for this video. If you watched up until now, really do appreciate that. Once again, links down below to everything that we've discussed and everything that we've mentioned. And I shall see you in the next video that I'm going to be filming with Dan. So as always, whatever you're doing, I hope you have a blessed day, a blessed week ahead. This is Zed from Zed Outdoors, and this is Dan from Dan Lawrence. Peace out.
Great. Thanks, everyone.